Welcome back to another episode of Warren Cali. In this episode, I'm going to detail the story of founder of the Avenues gang and prolific bodybuilder, Craig Monson. Craig Monson was born around 1950 in Conway, Arkansas, to a single mother and two older brothers, and later, a little brother. With the lack of opportunity and severe racism they faced, Craig's mother would pack up the family and head by bus to Los Angeles for a better life. Los Angeles would be a lot different than Arkansas, and Craig's family would bounce around a lot, trying to get stable. They would live in different areas in LA and also Compton. In Los Angeles in the 50s and 60s, even though it wasn't as bad as Arkansas, it was still a lot of racism in Los Angeles for African Americans. Craig's mother would later marry her boyfriend, who would become his stepfather, and the family would move on 83rd and Hooper, on the east side of South Central. Craig would be around 13 years old around this time. Craig would fast become adapted to his new neighborhood and make a lot of new friends, and hanging out with his friends in his neighborhood would be the first time he would start lifting weights. Craig would attend Charles Drew Middle School, and his love of bodybuilding would show. At a time when bodybuilding was mostly frowned upon, the staff at Charles Drew began to worry that Craig was dealing with some type of psychological issue. The school's vice principal quickly notified Craig's mother and stepfather and asked them to come to his office for a private meeting. He would go on to say that Craig's obsession with constantly working out with the school equipment had to stop. He would say all he wants to do is work out in the gym. All his time goes to working out, and something has to be going on with him. But it was nothing wrong with Craig. He just really enjoyed working out. Realizing the determination, commitment, and dedication her son displayed for weightlifting, Craig's mother decided to buy her 13-year-old son his first set of weights. Outside of working out, Craig loved football, which he was on several teams, and played in his neighborhood. With his own personal set of weights, Craig began working out even more, which is when his body started rapidly responding to his training. By age 14, his arms had developed to a point where he cut slits into his short sleeve t-shirts to make room and show off his growing biceps. By the time he reached Fremont High School, his arms measured to 14 inches. By the time he left, they measured to 17. Craig wasn't into playing football at Fremont, but soon realized that bodybuilding, not football, was his true calling. Los Angeles had several black gangs in the 60s, like the Businessman and the Slawsons among many others. But around 1967, Craig, who was 17, along with several of his friends, were drinking and smoking and hanging out, when Craig would say they needed a name for their crew. Craig would come up with the name, the Avenues, with them being on Hooper Avenue. The Avenues would be comprised of several of Craig's friends who lived in the neighborhood, and that was numerous of young teens from surrounding streets. Craig's name began to ring bells off his physical presence, putting fear in many people, just off his appearance, but people who tried him would pay for it. This was a long time before guns was constantly used, and it was all about fighting and using your hands, and Craig was good with his. People started to call him Big Mons because he was known to knock people out. But with getting so much attention, Craig would also get known by the police, and they would constantly harass him because he stood out with his size, and they would be intimidated by him. They would always point him out, and this would lead to things like the police picking him up and taking him to an alley and sticking a shotgun in his mouth to put fear in him. Craig didn't take any nonsense from anybody, and this led to him getting kicked out of various high schools. He would even get kicked out of a school for knocking out his teacher. He would be arrested after school, and he would go to camp to serve his time, which he would do several stints in jail. After getting out, Craig would go back to running the Avenues, which the gang wasn't like most gangs in later years. The Avenues just partied, hung out, and worked out, and sometimes they would get into altercations and whoop ass. Craig would later meet the future founder of the Crips, Raymond Washington, around 1968, when Craig was 18 and Raymond was 15. Raymond was known to have a smart mouth and always talk slick, which Craig despised. It would go all bad one day when Raymond kept making jokes at the expense of Craig's mom, which led to Craig slapping Raymond Washington. Raymond, who wanted to be a part of the Avenues, would be told not to come back around. Raymond would respond by saying, "I'm making my own gang." Craig, from his own words, would say, "What you gonna name it, you little Crip?" with Raymond having a limp, and that would be the name that Raymond Washington would later choose for his gang. They would be called the Crips. Craig would later be arrested when he was around 20 years old in 1970. An intruder, who had just been released from jail days prior, would break into Craig's home when he thought Craig was gone. The intruder was armed with a hammer and ransacked the home. A scuffle would quickly break out, and Craig got hit in the head with his hammer. During the melee, Craig was able to wrestle the hammer away from the intruder and began using it on him, which resulted in the man's death. Craig's friend would later snitch on him, but Craig was trying to figure out a way to dump the body. Craig saw this as an unfortunate unseen event as he was protecting his household, and he thought this was self-defense, but courts disagreed and charged him and convicted him of involuntary manslaughter. In 1971, he would go to Tracy, then San Quentin State Prison, where he continued lifting weights, and he would gain 22-inch arms. Craig wouldn't be released until 1975. By the time that Craig was released, the area he grew up in would be completely different. The avenues would be no more, and Raymond Washington, who he once slapped, would be the leader of the largest black gang in Los Angeles, the Crips. After being released from prison, Craig would do something most people wouldn't expect. He became a hairdresser. With him growing up having barber experience, he was naturally good with doing things involving hair, but he also continued lifting weights. Craig would even have a relationship with some Crip leaders, like Stanley Tookie Williams, who Craig would often work out with. Tookie looked at Craig as a big homie and a person he admired, especially on a bodybuilding scale. Craig became a regular at the pit in Venice Beach and always entertained large number of crowds. Crowds loved witnessing him do incredible feats of strength, sometimes lifting over 500 pounds. Craig was 6'2", reaching 280 pounds of muscle. While being on Venice Beach, a man would introduce himself to Craig and tell him he can help him start competing in bodybuilding competitions. Craig would start taking steroids to enhance his body. Craig would compete in competitions around the world in places like Switzerland and France, where he would compete and win a lot of competitions. Craig began to blowing up and becoming a superstar seemingly overnight while working at the city gym in LA and the pit at Venice Beach. He would even meet the likes of bodybuilders like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who Craig was even outdoing, with Craig being stronger than Arnold. Craig would become a person larger than life. At the height of Craig's bodybuilding fame in the mid-1980s, he can often be seen riding in chauffeur limousines and Mercedes-Benzes on the streets of Hollywood. Everybody wanted to be seen with Craig, and he would gain the name, the Hulk. But Craig's life would take a major turn for the worse. He picked up a drug habit with him being in Hollywood, and his addiction got so bad, he stopped working out. Most of the 90s, Craig was trying to fight addiction and being in rehab. Craig would distance himself from Hollywood, and he was able to attain employment working at a club. He would kick his drug habit, and he later picked up lifting again, and he was able to attain his Hulk-like frame again. The later years of Craig's life, he still worked out and did several interviews and began to train people and make a presence on social media. Craig Monson is in his 70s and now still lifting weights 5 to 6 times a week, and he has even made a book about his life and is in the works of making a documentary about himself. This will conclude this episode. If you haven't already, make sure you check out my previous episodes. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.